All right. So good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're watching from. Welcome to the session on MyData Operators, a view from Latin America. This session is really an idea to get together and talk about some of the particular characteristics of the Latin American region and how we can use or understand the concept of MyData Operators there. We will not be referring specifically to all the different features described in the MyData Operators white paper, but we will refer more generally to the concept of data intermediaries. So entities that enable data subjects connect to data holders, and that enable all forms of either data sharing or accountability over the processing of personal data. And so here we have a few different initiatives and projects that we would like to present to give you an idea about what is happening in the region, and then we can think in the final part, in the second part of the session, about how to move forward. Let me first of all introduce myself. My name is Nicolo Zingales. I'm a professor at FGV Direto Rio, so FGV Law School in Rio de Janeiro, and I'm a co-founder and coordinator of the MyData Brazil Hub. So I just want to start the discussion by first of all explaining what was the reason behind this. Initially, we were supposed to organize a conference in June 2020 in Rio de Janeiro. That would be the first big event putting together a lot of experts about data protection, privacy, but also data use, innovative uses with personal data, and also non-personal data. Unfortunately, we had to postpone that. But it remains the idea to stimulate this sort of regional discussion. And as part of that, I would like to also introduce to you a project that we are working on that is a mapping of data governance regimes and provisions in the region. I'm just now putting a link in the chat, and I will share a slide to show you. This is a Google document that basically it requires any contributor that is available, to provide information about the existing data governance arrangement in the region to fill out. There are several sections. Now I won't go in detail in each section, but the idea is, so far we have only and primarily been talking about data protection and privacy, but there are a lot of additional parts of the picture, additional elements, which can be defined as part of data governance arrangements. So we thought that we will benefit in the region from having something like this, a map, and this is our partners at Competition Policy Monitor that have already developed a map where you can click and get all the information about, in this case is, government reactions to COVID and all types of regulation that are in place. But the idea is to expand this and use it for tracking all data governance developments in the region. So I don't want to discuss this in detail now, but anyone that would like to contribute to this, please get in touch. We need contributors from different countries in Latin America. But now let me turn to the speakers. So the first speaker that we have is Arturo Muente, who is leading a number of projects on data protection and privacy at the Inter-American Development Bank. And I think we'll hear some very interesting perspective from him. Arturo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Nicolo, and thanks through you to the organization of MyData 2020 for having me in this space. So effectively, yes, we have been organizing a couple of studies around data protection. as you well know, this year has been one where data protection has been on the front page of many conversations with governments. It was for us something to study and a new topic, relatively new topic in the region since the approval of GDPR in Europe, more than the approval, the enaction of GDPR. So we've been trying to understand better how data protection is being regulated, how it's being carried out in the region. So we work with 26 different countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. One of the things that we've done is compare legal frameworks in countries that have data protection legislation with a set of principles that the Ibero-American Data Protection Network has issued in 2017. They are pretty aligned with GDPR. As you know, GDPR was approved in 2016, even though it was enforced in 2018. So these are 42, I think, different topics, and we compared the legislation in the countries that have legislation. One of the first findings is that only 12 countries that we work with have legislation on data protection. So that means that there are 14 that do not have data protection legislation. A couple have had legislation being approved this year or last year, includes Jamaica and Barbados. They are pending ratification by the governor. So you could, say that there are a couple of more countries. And in the case of Brazil, the law was entered into effect this year. So that's the first thing. One of the things that we've noted, and we're still working on the data that was collected through this exercise, is that there's not a lot of alignment. Of course, the latest the law was enacted, the more alignment it has with GDPR. For example, the Chilean privacy law, which was, I think, enacted in 1999, is probably the one that has the least coincidences with the principles. Even though it has been amended throughout the years, it still sort of probably requires some type of overhaul. Whereas Barbados, as I said, one law that was approved last year has the most coincidences. So and the rest of the countries are everywhere in between. So that's one finding. The other one is that everything that has to do with cross-border data exchanges is not considered, or it's being touched very generally by legislation. So it's still something that we feel has to be further studied and regulated, first understood by authorities and then regulated. We don't have a regional body such as the EU that can sort of work as an umbrella for these kind of policies, but still we feel that countries need to start talking to each other on this. The other thing that we've done is mapping of initiatives that countries and governments have done in response to COVID that had somehow to do with collecting personal data, and whether they've been following their own sort of recommendations or recommendations from what are considered best practices in those countries that do not have data protection legislation. So that's still something that we're working on. We're finding that very few have actually asked for consent from citizens. Very few ask for citizens' consent when transmitting and sharing information. So there's a lot of things to be done in terms of improving the understanding and awareness of what data protection legislation implies. We've also made a short note that's the one that we want to publish first, aimed at countries that do not have data protection legislation, but that want to understand how to do it right. So even though they don't have data protection legislation, some countries have actually approached us and asked about what are the protocols, how should they collect the data, what kind of data they can collect. And so we prepared a very sort of general document, since there's no legislation in these countries by definition, but that tries to collect best practices. Last but not least, we also carried out a survey among citizens in 10 countries in the region, just to better understand their awareness, their knowledge on data protection, what kind of rights they have, what kind of risks they are exposed to. We already have the results. We're still crunching the numbers. Unfortunately, everything was pushed in time here. So when we first talked, I was expecting to be able to present more concrete results, but we have some insights. One of the first and foremost, and actually probably confirms a lot of our beliefs, is that people are not that well aware of what it implies to have their data protected. So when we asked whether they are aware of data protection, whether they feel that their data should be safeguarded, 70% of people in these 10 countries say yes. But when we ask whether they think government should be able to track their location if it's important in the pandemic management, 60% say that yes. 60% also say that they don't have any problem with government collecting personal information. So there seems to be this awareness of it being something worth worrying about, but not a lot in terms of what it really implies and what are the implications and how should that translate into better policies. I think someone mentioned Mexico. In effect, Mexico is second to Barbados in terms of alignment to GDPR. They have two different legal instruments, one which was, I think, enacted first towards the private sector, and then a second one, which is rather, I wouldn't call it recent, but it came like probably 4 or 5 years after, which deals with data collected by the government. And indeed, once you join both or merge both documents, they do indeed have a lot of alignment with the principles that the Irrarazaval network has issued. I mean, I will leave it there. I know we have a lot of speakers, but I'm happy to answer any questions about this. Thank you.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much, Arturo. Yes, so we will collect burning questions about the presentations as we go forward. So if you have any clarification that you would like, we can do it after every intervention by the speakers, but we'll also have a separate part for discussion at the end. I would like to raise a point for clarification myself, which is when you do this study about the different data protection frameworks, do you only analyze laws that are called, data protection law, or there are horizontal, or you also include, for example, consumer protection provisions that have to do with data, or data protection law that applies to health only? This would be one question. And the second one is also where you said that certain states do not have the framework in place, but they are willing to set some important principles. So how do you bring this into the study somehow, or what is the challenge there? No, you're not able.
No, so very important questions. We have not looked into sectorial laws. Dominican Republic, for example, which is kind of a mix. We actually saw and analyzed that one, because even though it's intended for the financial sector, it does have some general principles that can be interpreted as something that percolates up to the rest of sectors. But that's an exception. The law in Paraguay and a couple of others that we looked at, we didn't analyze them, were aimed specifically at the financial sector. And what you find in many countries is that the financial sector has some regulation specific, and this is because of the know your customer and then some principles that are sort of best practices in international financial systems that need to be followed by banks. But we haven't gone into those. Health regulation and health laws usually have 1 or 2 articles somewhere out there that regulate the sharing and the collection of personal information. We haven't looked into those specifically. As you well pointed out, we are looking into data protection legislation that's sort of a blanket for the whole of the country. Those are the ones that we aimed at. With respect to these conversations that we had, even though there are many countries that are, as of this year, going into their, or having in their Congress some projects of legislation. What we've seen is that these have been going on, in and out for a while. So there's some awareness in certain government officials of what it should take on, or at least, as I said before, the topic of data protection. So we've even provided comments to some of these legislation projects, but the conversations have been anecdotal, even though they have been such. We prepared this document because we felt that it was could be an important tool for such officials that are out there. Not everyone, of course, reached out to us. So yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we'll discuss more, in the part where we think about the way forward. But one question that is pointed out here that is important is, do we need our own model, or can we just borrow the model of, the GDPR or the Convention 108? I think this is something that has to do with what is so specific about the region. Is there something that should tell us to do things slightly differently? But let's park this for a moment and move to our second speaker, who is Miguel Moraccino from Hyperderecho, which is an NGO in Peru working on digital rights. And he also led a project with Kathrine Reilly, who is going to follow him after the presentation. Kathrine Reilly is a professor at Simon Fraser University in Canada. They were on the ground with an initiative called Somos Dados, where they were basically raising awareness over data and allowing community to exercise their data subject rights, even if in some of these countries, the legislation was not in place in terms of data protection law, but they were using other instruments. Right, Miguel?
Thanks a lot, Nicolo, for the introduction, and thanks to the MyData conference organizers for having us here. Effectively, my name is Miguel Moraccino, and I am the Executive Director of Hyperderecho. We are a digital rights nonprofit here in Lima, Peru. And in the last year and a half, we've been developing this project with Professor Reilly from Simon Fraser University. That from my point of view, I'm a lawyer. So from my point of view, it was an exercise of developing a tool that will allow people to send detailed and personalized data subject requests to companies in Peru that were holding their data. So in our country, we have a data protection law in the books since the last. It's been in the books since the last 5 years, so it's a relatively new law. But we already see a lot of large companies in compliance with this law. So we thought that it would be an interesting opportunity to allow people to send detailed and personalized data subject requests, because up until then, the only way you can exercise this right was through filling a very blank and general request on the website of the company or in the offices. So what we built, following the several examples of other intermediary operators of these kinds of services, is we built a model request with very targeted categories like geolocation data, purchasing history, and so on. And we did this for several markets like banks, pharmacies, supermarkets, and so on. So this has been a very interesting experience from the point of view of learning. What we discovered, and this ties into what Arturo was sharing, is like a lot of people weren't aware that this was a right that they had. And not only they weren't aware, but they also lack the proper language or the proper curiosity to really go deep and ask these companies exactly what kind of data they were holding about them. Also, another challenge that we face is that we were building this tool, and therefore we were asking people for their own data. So we ourselves were becoming personal data holders. So we built the tool in a way where we would only dispatch the request, but we would not receive the response because we didn't want to be in the place where we would amass this amount of data logs. And this gave rise to the equal challenge of not really being aware of how many requests are being answered from the point of view of the companies. So as a social experiment, as a legal experiment, we believe this has been successful. Obviously, this is still in the works. This is still being publicized in our country, but we do acknowledge that there are several limitations in terms of accountability and in terms of measuring to what degree these efforts have been successful. But I think one of the most successful aspects of this whole experiment has been the methodology that Professor Reilly has been developing for conducting citizen data audits. And I would love to hear more about it from her.
Thanks, Miguel. Yeah, so we started this process about 2 or 3 years ago. We met at Miguel and I met at RightsCon, and we took inspiration from work that was being done by the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto in Canada. They had a portal called Access My Info, and so that became the inspiration for Son Mis Datos, and the model was taken and modified and made relevant to Latin America. And what we did in the project was invite volunteers to come and learn about their personal data and about Son Mis Datos, and then use it to access their data. And then the final crucial step was to carry out citizen data audits. So a citizen data audit means that citizens leverage the right to access the data that companies hold about them as a means to monitor the degree to which regulators or businesses are following and enforcing relevant standards. But in the process of carrying out this project, we began to realize that the standards that are used as the basis for evaluation or valuation are really important. And so in the process in Peru, it became clear that we were using the legal standards of the country as the means to monitor those companies. They were our starting point. And so if we step back a little bit and think about the nature of the data governance regime as it has been enshrined around the world, in Canada, in GDPR, in Peru, it's really about finding the right balance between the privacy rights of individuals and the ability of firms to innovate. And so with that, you start to see certain types of values become significant in anybody's audit of how personal data is being used. So if we look at that data governance framework, what we see are corporate standards of profitability, things like service quality, strategic insight, direct sale of data, and also risk mitigation, which is very important to companies, things like reputation management, legal obligations, and competition. And if you look at governance criteria coming from legal frameworks, you see the crystallization of corporate best practices from North America and from Europe. And so these are best practices around consensual relationships, privacy protection, and data security. So what this project really got me thinking about is what it would mean for citizens to arrive at their own set of criteria for evaluating companies that didn't come from the dominant data management regime. If we were to look at things differently, we might ask, instead of asking what is the right balance between the privacy rights of individuals and the ability of firms to innovate, we might ask, what is the best way for the community to invest its data resources and mobilize digital production? And this is more of a data stewardship approach or a digital developmentalism approach, which would be more appropriate, in my mind, to many countries in Latin America. Here we have the idea, I'm quoting Van Dyke, Poel, and de Waal from a book called The Platform Society. We have the idea that public values need to be articulated in each sector and in each context because they are both the stakes and the outcomes in political and ideological contests. And they say this in reference to data stewardship. So Van Dyke et al. Give us a different set of values, things like equity, inclusiveness, fair treatment, responsibility, but also safety, privacy, transparency, accuracy, quality, comprehensiveness, power to control, democratic control. If we push that framework even further, we can look into frameworks like the Maori principles for data sovereignty. These are indigenous principles that come out of New Zealand. And here we see values like collective benefit. So now we're no longer thinking of individual values, but collective values. So collective benefit, reciprocity, guardianship, control, and self-determination. So with this in mind, when we did our process of citizen data literacy and citizen data audit in Peru, we did participant observation and we did some survey work. And we learned that in the particular case of Peru, some of the values that were really important to people included clarity and transparency, equity and a level playing field. These were to be expected, but also ease of process, choice, and respect and care, which I haven't seen in other frameworks. I think it's really important to interpret these findings in the Peruvian context, given our participants. So first of all, the Peruvian context is highly neoliberal political economy, and the business climate is challenging. It's challenging for businesses to adopt new digital approaches. Meanwhile, our research subjects are young, educated professionals. And the fact that they were experiencing a lack of respect and a lack of care in and through their data-fied interactions with the digital economy, I think was really significant and spoke to something significant about the culture of Peru and maybe more broadly, the culture of Latin America. So with that, I want to leave you with these thoughts that data values or criteria will probably need to be specific to given sectors or communities. And they are culturally and locally embedded. And that means that citizens will evaluate their experiences in the digital economy differently depending on where they are. And that means that when it comes to data intermediation, data will need to be governed in ways that reflect the values of specific communities. So I will leave things there. Thank you very much.
Thank you both Miguel and Kathrine for this overview of the very interesting project you were engaged in and the associated values. So again, if there's any question for this project, we can address them now. I don't see anything in the chat. My question in relation to two things that you said. One about the fact that you were afraid of becoming liable for this data that you were holding. So this is something Miguel mentioned. So you were afraid of being the controllers of personal data, I think. But I would like to understand if there's a way to provide these services in a way that you can also have the answers and send them to individuals and not become the controller, not be subject to or a whole range of obligations. So become basically just a tool, an intermediary without having all the liability attached. And then I more connected to what Kathrine was saying is, how did you see this concept of values play out in your project? Did you actually have a use case? Do you have maybe a use case with this data about a specific sector or a specific community that benefited from this process of requesting the data in a way that could be different from other communities? So it could, if you have a use case.
Well, I'll address your first question, Nicolo. It's not that we were afraid of becoming data controllers, but we were really cognizant of the fact that by designing this website and by designing this process, we were ourselves putting in that position, and we wanted, following like a privacy by design or a data minimization approach, trying as much to not really hold that much data, not really like put ourselves in that of a compromise, that much of a compromise, because according to Peruvian laws, if we were to do that, we would have to do a lot of stuff. But so I think it will be really hard to design a system where we would, acting as an intermediary, we won't be collecting so much data. And this is just because the law in our country says that for you to send a valid request to another company, you have to provide your full name, your address, your phone number, your email, and also you have to attach a copy of your ID, of your nationality. So that's a lot of personal data that has to go with the request. The only way to take away the intermediary would be to allow people to send requests directly themselves to the company, right? Otherwise, if you have an intermediary who's acting as a delivery service, it's what we have done is like we have a rule in the server that deletes all the personal information, I think 24 hours after the request has been sent. So we're minimizing the amount of data we're holding, but nevertheless, we are still picking up the data, and it's it's our word against them.
Okay. Yeah, if I can just comment on that, I think there is a recent guidance in the European Union on the concept of joint controllers and processors. And what I see, the evolving understanding of this is that not necessarily because you have access to the data, you are a controller. You can be a controller just because you have some way of influencing how the data is being processed, but you don't need to have access. And perhaps in the opposite is also true, that even if you have access, you can still be a processor. But of course, this is the guidance in the European Union, and it depends on the situation.
Yeah, and also it's the same mechanism where you always need a controller, and you can have a processor. But yeah, in that model, you cannot be a pure processor without a controller, right? You definitely, in this case, who will be a controller? I don't know. That's a very nerdy question for your law students, Nicolo.
Yeah. sorry for going so lawyerly. Please, Kathrine, if you want to say something.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about use cases in two ways, but neither of them are particularly satisfactory answers. So first of all, I do consider Peru itself a use case, but at a macro scale. So I'm a political economist and a communications scholar, and one of the things I find very fascinating is that particular response around care. Another comment that has been made to us, not specifically with regards to Peru, but with regards to a second project we're realizing now, is that citizens often feel like they're facing this vast bureaucracy and that they constantly have to navigate it using their personal data. And they become, just constantly data providers, and they're trying to navigate this bureaucracy to figure out how they access whatever service they're trying to access. And they're frustrated because they often can't do it, and they can't do it well. And so they don't feel cared for, and they don't feel respected by this system. And meanwhile, and this is where the other political economy part comes in, the nature of hierarchical capitalism in Latin America, which is a little bit technical, basically that means that the investment climate is such that it's very difficult for companies to invest, to take the risk of upgrading their digital systems. And so they often are doing so tenuously without sufficient investment. They're not doing so well. They're making use of third-party systems because there's less risk involved, and they're not appropriate to the local context. And so there's a big mismatch there. And so I think that Peru use case is very interesting at a macro level. Now, the other piece of my answer would be to say that we're doing a follow-on project right now, which has been greatly delayed by this year of pandemic. But in the spring, we hope to start doing field work on 5 case studies in 5 countries. So one of them will be Peru. In the case of Peru, Miguel's team is now doing something much more specific. They're looking at women who purchase contraceptives. What is their interaction like when they go to a pharmacy? What kind of data changes hands? What can they learn through data access requests? And what is their specific need in terms of that interaction? And so then we get into the healthcare sector and what would data values of women in the healthcare sector look like. And our different our 5 countries include Chile, Colombia, Paraguay, and Uruguay. They each have different cases with different audiences. And so we'll be better able to answer that question in about a year or so. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so now let's move on to the third or fourth speaker, which is Rodrigo Irrarazaval. He's CEO of a company called Wibson. That is what I would define perfectly fitting the role of data intermediary by aggregating a number of functions. I will let him explain better what Wibson does. Rodrigo, you have the floor.
Thanks, Nicolo, for the intro. It's a pleasure to be here. So, yes, as Nicolo said, I'm Rodrigo Irrarazaval, Wibson CEO. Wibson allows users to discover which companies hold your data and to take back control of it. The idea is with one click. I will present to you, let me share my screen. So my idea mainly is to show you very, very quickly what is Wibson, but my objective is so then you can see how we got all the insights and all the information that I will share to you of Europe and of especially LatAm. So a very quick intro. With Wibson, we have an app in which you install your app, the Wibson app, and you can discover which companies hold your data. We found that on average, between 200 and 450 companies are holding your data. What we are showing to each user is which type of company hold your data, which type of data these companies have about you. Also, we show you which of these companies are spamming you, etc. So what we are trying to give is the transparency that we believe that internet doesn't give to you, and especially that big corporations or companies doesn't give to their users. So once users have all this transparency, they can start getting control, and control can be, for example, by data subject request. So users can request to delete their information, especially from those companies that they are not using in this moment, or from those companies that they want to disappear. So my idea to show you this is because now I will show you some insights that we learn about what are the answers of the companies to the data subject request. So users have sent thousands of requests to different companies, and companies already answered to the users, and we analyze that, and of course always with user consent, and the idea is to show you what companies are answering. Just a quick here, this is mainly our vision and our principles. We are very aligned with MyData values. So as I was saying before, transparency, control, and balance are our main principles. Transparency, as we believe that consumers always need to know which companies are holding their data. They need to have control of it. And balance, because we believe that this is not a war against companies, but we want to create a more trusted data ecosystem. So here and now is the most important thing, or what I want to show to you. So we send thousands of requests to different companies around the world. And what we analyze is that only the 59% of the companies just answered to a data subject request. The other percentage, they never answer. And from this 59%, we analyzed which type of answer we are sending the companies. And here you can see the percentage of the different answers. For example, the 22% of the companies delete a user's data without asking any more information. The 2.2 said that they were not going to delete users' data. 11% asked for confirmation. This type of confirmation was, for example, to click again on a link, to answer an email saying, yes, I want to delete my data. The 23.1% added a link, or they just say, okay, you have to go to your account and you can delete your data from there. We cannot help you from here. The 19.8% asked to verify ID. So in this case, they were asking for IDs and other type of information. The 8.8% of the companies were not didn't found users' data. This is very strange because how we analyze users' data is by scanning their email. So we know that these companies are having the users' email, so they are not doing a very good mapping. And the 13.2%, they create a ticket, and after 1 or 2 months, they answer you with any of these answers.
Rodrigo, sorry to interrupt. There's a couple of questions in the
Yes.
chat asking where are these companies based and where were the users' requests coming from?
Okay, very good question. So where are these? And here I believe I will try to answer you a little bit your question. So the companies where are based globally, we send requests to companies from different countries. If I'm not mistaken, I believe we are more than 55 countries that receive our requests. Companies from more than 55 countries. Of course, our users, the percentage of our users are mainly people from Argentina, Spain, and the United States. So we have people from different parts of the world and sending requests from different places. What we have is that for each company, we use different technologies to enrich data in a way that we never take out users' data, but we bring public data to the user. So what we do is for each company, we found where their headquarters are. So we categorize each company by country, and so we can understand the response of each company by country. Of course, let me say, Wibson is a startup. We launched this app only 5 months ago. We are not making too much marketing. We are finding product market fit. We are trying to solve different problems that we find in the way, and our idea is to improve it. So that's why these metrics we suppose that will change, and we will have and we will improve it and have more precise information in the following months. But something very interesting is that we separate the Europe and United States from one side, and the countries from that are not from Europe and United States, and this is where the answer of data subject request per region. So I believe that this is very important for LatAm. That is because we say that, or what we can say with this is that companies after GDPR or different regulations are really adapting to this, and we need more regulations so different companies in the rest of the world, and especially LatAm, start answering to data subject requests, and users can get control of their data. So this is maybe just a conclusion that what we found. First, users really don't have transparency, and something that is very important by giving this type of solution for the users is that we need to win their trust. We need to always to show them how we do the things, because we always try to do the things as best as possible, taking care of their privacy, of their data, and that is very, very important. And we need to, let's say, overshow. Why? Because as I said before, the internet and different companies before let's say, like exploited the users. So users don't trust when a company are going to say, hey, I will help you with your personal data. So that's something very, very important to be very loyal to the user, to show and to start and to try to implement different ways of privacy as design.
Thank you. So there's already a couple of questions in the chat that I will raise to you. One is, well, do you know, maybe is something that you can request also through Wibson, if the companies are actually deleting the data that they require for identification purposes? Because I understand that you are able to request the deletion of all the data, but does that include also the identification services, so the IDs? And then the second question is, if you do this basically on a one-time basis, where you request and download all the data, or if you do that on a continuous basis. I think, if I interpret correctly, this is the question, but Jan, feel free to correct me if it's not what you meant.
Okay, so let's say that Wibson, we don't store your personal information. So what we do is we show you all the companies, and when you send when you ask a request to delete your data, we automate the data subject request to the company. That's how our MVP is working in this moment. If the company asks for verification, confirmation, the company answers to the user's email, and the user is the one that continue with the process. So that's how we are working it in this moment. We are analyzing different solutions. For example, to have a personal data, let's say a personal data vault in your app, in a way where your data is in your phone in the app, but Wibson doesn't have access to it. So we are trying to analyze different solutions around that. But for the moment, we want to take care of users' data. So we understand it's more complex, but the user have to continue with the data request. And also, as we are starting, the only request that we are allowing is to delete your data. So all the other requests or ask a copy, etc., we are not allowing it. Mainly because we are a startup, we want to solve a specific problem and then to scale. And then we will see if the user asks us, we will start adding other requests. And the other question was, okay, so I don't understand if the app aggregate the data regularly, or do you require the perform? Okay, so how the app works? Are you saying how we find the companies, or we scan the companies, or?
Jan, maybe you can clarify.
I think the previous question or answer answered my question. So it's mainly if you download the data. I understand that this is an MVP, so you don't at this stage.
Yes, that's right. What we do is the phone scan your email to look for the different companies that hold your data, and scans it in a daily basis. So if you install the app each day, it will show you, like, for example, new companies that are holding your data. Of course, we do it in a privacy way. What means that this type of data never goes out of your phone. We do it especially because we believe that users to take care of users' privacy. And of course, what we believe is that privacy means control, and privacy means also decisions. So we're very transparent, and if users don't like this type of solution because they say, okay, I don't want this, of course they can ask and delete their data, let's say the tiny data that we hold about users, and we will do it immediately.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. So yeah, I think also this is an interesting intersection with the point of Miguel with regard to being a controller. I know you're not a lawyer, so I won't go into that in that rabbit hole again. But you know, to the extent that you are scanning emails, probably, you know, there are some principles that need to be followed in doing that, because you are in a way accessing user personal data. So it's interesting to think, you know, for this kind of businesses and initiatives, what are the principles that should be followed, especially in countries where we don't have legislation that regulates tightly what we do. I mean, we all trust that Wibson is a very responsible company, but you know, that's something that maybe we should think for the future. What are the limits in doing that?
Yes, and there's a very good question of Temu. That's kind of email to look for data holders. So we saw different solutions such as Revoke that show you a list of companies, like more than 2,000 companies where you can delete your data. But the main problem is that how can you delete something if you don't know? And I have this experience before because I started 3 years ago creating a data marketplace based on blockchain. And the idea was to monetize a user's data in a privacy way. And we find a problem that is, how can you monetize something or get more value if you don't have control? And then we started trying to give this control to the user, and we say, hey, how can you control your data or ask a company to delete your data if you don't have the transparency? So yes, you can give a list of 5,000 companies, but that is not a real solution for the user. So that's why we are scanning the email. There's also another company called Mine. They are from Israel, and they are doing also something very similar to us.
If you could put a link in the chat, maybe we can also take a look at that company. That would be interesting.
Of course.
Okay, then the next speaker is, I see that the line is cutting a bit every now and then. Hopefully it will improve. But our next speaker is Joao Gasparino, who is a part of Dados Legais. It's, again, I will let him explain better, but it's one of these initiatives and businesses that have come up with the entry into force of data protection legislation, in particular in Brazil, and that help basically companies be compliant with the law by creating an interface for the exchanging of requests with users, and maybe also some other things. So Joao, please address it in a more proper way than I did.
Thank you, Nicolo. First thing, I wanted to congratulate everyone else for the presentations. I got here a bit late, but I could see some of them, so congratulations. And so as Nicolo said, we are from Dados Legais. Our main goal is to help companies to answer DSRs in an automated way. And just to give some context, I don't know how familiar everyone here is with the legislation and all the worldwide context, but it is a fact that we live in a time where people's economic and social information have great value. So it is not absurd to say that we also live in a time where data regulation is one of the most important rules of all. Recently, like actually this month, the Brazilian Supreme Court suspended a federal legislation that allowed telecom companies to share users' private information with public agencies with the purpose of supporting the production of official reports, statistics during the COVID-19 pandemic. This is a historic decision for us because it recognizes the autonomous fundamental right to data protection. A similar case happened in Germany in 1983. So we're a bit late, but we're getting there. And so, okay, so we see that data allows you to identify a person, and it can be used by companies and governments for profiling. And data collection in these cases, in the Brazilian case, where they wanted telecom companies to share with the government for to create statistics, the data is usually collected for longer than expected, and also is used for purposes other than the ones they were first intended to. So what we see here is that the judiciary, not only in Brazil but around the world, is saying that this type of information deserves constitutional protection. Okay, but okay, but the paper accepts everything. All right, so how do we guarantee this protection in the real world? It is not an easy task, but we try to make it easier. If we take a look at the European scenario, for instance, we see that most companies took at least half a year to achieve the GDPR compliance. And it's not only a financial challenge, but also an operational one as well. The CEOs in companies have been spending hours and hours, hundreds of hours a year, just to make their companies to be in compliance with the regulation. And in an effort to minimize this risk, most privacy professionals recognize the importance of reducing human errors related to the privacy requests. And yet, most companies rely on dozens of people to complete an access or deletion data subject request. And these requests, they increased over 500 in Sweden after GDPR. So that's what we expect here in as well, since the legislation is brand new. And now with this worldwide wave of impending privacy regulation, these professionals are also looking for ways to operationalize privacy management and to sustain compliance for the long term. Because, okay, in the beginning, you can have manual solutions in your company, but it's not sustainable in the long run. And a very small portion of these professionals have realized the benefits from automation. In 2019, 58% of European companies did not answer the DSRs in the legal deadlines, and also only 50% of the businesses implemented
we have a slight technical problem. It's a nice caption, but well, hopefully we'll reconnect. Oh yeah, there is coming again. What is particularly interesting for me is that this challenge is not one that is only relating to Brazil, but this is a problem that is faced virtually everywhere in LatAm. The law is on the books in some countries. In some countries, it's not even on the books. But then, how to make it concretely applicable in the way that we like to promote here with MyData is having a platform. Okay, Joao is.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Yes.
I'm truly sorry. I'll try to make this faster so I don't.
Don't worry. Don't worry.
Over my time. Okay, so as I said, 58% of the companies did not reply on the legal deadlines in Europe, only in 2019, and only 50% of the businesses implemented automated solutions. I don't think this is a coincidence. Over 220 million pounds have been applied in fines so far. Carrefour just received a few weeks ago or last week, €3 million fine. I mean, all this money could be being invested for something else. The Uber drivers are suing Uber for their data because they claim for transparency. Actually, I don't know if this lawsuit has already had some news on it, but if they succeed, the Uber drivers will have access to their own records, and they are being managed by the algorithm. So they don't know whether they get different treatment due to the information the company has on them. Okay, so what we know is that it's very important for companies to provide easy access to data subjects. And this is where Dados Legais comes in. To reduce compliance costs, guarantee DSRs are responded correctly and we actually correctly and in time, and we actually do it in minutes. And why is this important? even though the fines are not being applied here in Brazil by the public agency, people are already getting being compensated if whether the company answered their DSRs or not. I'm not going to say that we make it a piece of cake. We don't make it that easier, but we guide the companies through the whole process. We get there together. We get to data compliance together. And how do we do it? First thing, we help companies organize the data. Some of these can also be automated. We developed a software that is an open source software that we call it a data discovery agent that scans the databases structure. What does this mean? We don't capture the data itself, but only the structure, and then we can see which kind of data there is in the in that database. Then, before everything else is ready, we can release our DSR menu for the company's internal and external clients. So you still have a manual solution, but you are already centralizing the requests and managing them with clarity with our dashboards. So whether you put out on email like privacyandcompany.com, you're going to start receiving a lot of emails, and the DPO will start to forward those emails to whoever is the right person who should have received it, and cannot filter only through the DSR, and this makes their lives terrible. So after all this, when the inventory is ready, when we have all the data structure, all the applied legislation, we automate the DSR answers, complying with every legislation applied to the LGPD. If you have to keep someone's data for more than 5 years or more than 10 years due to labor legislation or whatever legislation is applied, we automate that also. And from 10 years from now, that data will be excluded if there was a request. If there was a request made right now. So, and one thing that is important to stand out is that our technology is 100% ours. So I don't know any other company in Brazil that has not been. So it makes a little bit harder to move stuff around, like to adapt the platform to the client. Mostly the client has to adapt to the platform, and that's not a very friendly interface. And since I had some problems previously, and I don't have my presentation, I would like to show you, if there's still time, Nicolo, how the platform works very quickly. Yes, I got the website from. Is it okay?
Yeah, quick for you. Yeah, couple of minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a client. They allowed us to do this, so I had their blessing. And they are a news platform. Here is Jota, here from Brazil. And once we go to the footnote here, we see your data here, seus dados in Portuguese. So here I'm already inside Dados Legais, and this is our menu. We have only 3 rights here, but we can put every one of them. They choose to put only these 3, and when you click here in plus, we explain to you what you're doing. So I want to know what kind of data they have.
Oh no.
Only advance. Then immediately I receive an email with the token. Just I put the token here. Okay, so my request is open. I get a protocol number here, and in a matter of
not coming yet. Maybe the bad connection is responsible.
No, I don't think so. Here. So it was concluded, and here is my data. So I have MailChimp with a bunch of data from my signature, RD Station, which is their marketing, Yugo, which is the payment system, and Database One, which is an internal database they have. And I get all of this in a few seconds. So I make sure that the companies don't that they comply with the deadlines. And that's it. I'm sorry for the improvise, but
no, thank you. And this is so good. I mean, it's actually diametrically complementary to what Kathrine and Miguel have been doing. They have been doing basically the automation of the request side. So I think there is room for collaboration and exchange there. But I have just one question about this, because you say that you automate basically these responses, but you know that there are some limits to basically what you can obtain from the company. So sometimes the laws have exceptions about what is a business, maybe it's a business secret or other exceptions to allow the company to say, no, I cannot give you this data. So what is your position in that regard? You automatize every single thing that the company says, well, this is a secret I don't want to reveal. What is your role there?
So it's all the process, as I said, like we gather together. So it's all made by 4 hands, Dados legais in the company, and together we'll make the inventory. In the inventory, whenever we have the data structure, we're going to categorize every single kind of data that they have. And once they receive a request, our platform will be automated to know if that request can be answered, whether it will be answered, which data will be provided, which data can be provided, which data they have the right to keep secret, and which data they have the right to keep for longer, once you have like labor legislation and all that stuff. How is data defined during that process? I don't know if I understood the question. I'm sorry, but yes.
The system.
Is this? I'm not sure if I understood the question. I'm sorry, but I'll try to answer it.
Kathrine is there, so she can explain the question. But
we of the platform, because what citizens really want to know is how the data. Oh, okay. If they want to know how the data is used, they also can have that request. And in the implementation period of the platform, we automatize these answers. So whenever they ask, how are you using my data? And then the request comes to us. We send an API sign with the correct response. How use and why.
Okay. Well, I think we understood. I mean, this is a...
I don't know if I answered, but...
Yes, you've answered. I thought the line cut a little bit at the end, but I think we...
I'm sorry, I have a bad connection.
No problem. We understood, and I think now we can start, with second part of the discussion, where I want all of us to reflect a little bit on, maybe Joao, if you can mute yourself, because I think the line is cutting there and it makes a strange sound. Thank you. So what could we propose as principles moving forward? So remember, we started with a presentation by Arturo that said, basically only 14 countries have a data protection law, if I remember correctly. There's a lot of lack of detail and rules. So perhaps, what we can do here as MyData community, as a group also here in this session, is say, what principles do we want to, let's say, suggest for this kind of initiatives to flourish. All these initiatives that we have been seeing here are fantastic. I'm talking in particular about the concrete projects. I mean, of course, Arturo's initiative and project is very important, but I'm now focused on the practical application. So if we want to stimulate this kind of intermediaries, should we have something like in Europe, where they just passed this Data Governance Act, and they list some specific limits or restrictions to what data intermediaries can do. For example, one of the issues is, especially if you automatize requests, you should have procedures in place to prevent misuse of these tools. For example, preventing users from flooding companies with continuous data subject requests that are always the same and that you don't need to repeat all the time. Or you know, what are the standards that we should impose to these intermediaries on how they handle this data? You know, we have seen with Miguel that this can be a sensitive issue. So I'm not saying that we should outlaw business models here or technologies, particular technology, but maybe we want to suggest what are the responsible ways of moving forward here. What are the best practices? Other things that I think are related to what Kathrine was discussing is what is this role of intermediaries with regard to raising awareness and creating collective values for communities? Should we also define some principles there for enabling data cooperatives, data trust frameworks, etc.? I know I'm throwing a bunch of stuff there. I'm trying to be a little bit more high level than the actual provisions in the Data Governance Act, but there, some of the things that stand out for me are requiring these data intermediaries to be neutral, to have fiduciary obligations towards users. So meaning that you cannot be serving the user, but actually being paid by someone else at the same time, and do everything in the favor of those who are paying and not actually the user, which is, again, it's something that was actually just discussed in another session on the business for personal data operator, MyData Operators. And one of the big questions is, should we allow these kind of models that are paid through someone else than the users? So paying for access to the users. So all these are, you know, some examples on requirements that the Data Governance Act is laying out. And I'm wondering, should we have a Latin American Data Governance Act with similar provisions? What do you think? Or is it something that we should leave to states instead? So I guess any comments along those lines would be very welcome. So there's also some comments in the chat.
I can give it a shot. I mean, it would be ideal, but you cannot have such an instrument because we don't have something like the European Union in Latin America. So even if the OAS, the Organization of American States, tries to push something like this, I think it will be sort of deflated in terms of something that may be applicable to all the countries. Remember that more than half don't have legislation. So I understand what you mean. I would root for it, you know, but the practicalities of that happening are I don't know, maybe principles, maybe the commercial blocks, you know, Mercosur, Alianza Pacífico, Pacific Alliance, you know, there are probably most countries belong to some kind of commercial trade bloc within the region. Within those, with the hook of cross-border data exchanges, you can start to talk about these kind of things. And that could be an interesting way to approach it. But a blanket sort of regulation that applies to all the governments, I think it's you know, could be a long shot. Yeah. Jan, I think, has a comment.
I hear you. Yes, please, Jan, go ahead.
I'm going to make a couple of suggestions. Education. It was obvious from many of the presentations, people don't understand what they're reading, so increasing the awareness and simplifying the process for an individual to process the information. I've been reviewing many privacy policies, and I've read that in order to read them, sometimes you need a PhD, maybe a legal degree like you have, but, and also the concept of opt-in, it's something that's getting better, like you see with the example with the cookies, but that you need to, I believe at least that there should be more of an opt-in. I don't know how that legislation is across LatAm, if it's consistent, if they even have a language explaining that it should be an opt-in, but that would be something to educate as well. That's one aspect. And the other is, and there are three that I was going to touch on. Another one is the certification. I think the people who are going to help educate should have some level of awareness, a standard to follow. And how do you abide to these privacy policies? So there are chief data officers in these companies. What should their awareness be? And the countries here, the data authority, privacy authority, they usually have information like UK has a very nice webpage with ICO, which explains in detail how to a small business think of filling out, because you need to think of big company and small company. So how do you help the small companies? And the third thing, and this is something more of a world issue, is what kind of platforms are being encouraged to use to manage the privacy. We had two examples of solutions to facilitate, but I don't know if you were in the session where the presentation talking about China being creating a platform that's being adopted by, it was in the main session at earlier in the day, middle of the day, at least in Sweden. They're creating platforms for managing people's data, and because they are able to, as a country, to manage it through one platform, it competes against the countries that don't have a unified platform for data processing. So you have to keep competitive and aware of what platforms are out there and encouraging them. If it makes them difficult, you're going to have countries like China, which has no MyData operator principle in their mindset, being adopted by different governments. And depending on the government that's running, could use the platform incorrectly. That's yeah, my 3 points. Thanks.
Yeah, well, they're excellent points. I think, yes, perhaps a graduated approach, you know, thinking about different levels of compliance for different types of businesses, different sizes of businesses could be useful. So that means that when the smaller your client is, as a data intermediary I'm talking, the more you would have to go an extra mile in providing awareness and facilitate the processing of information. That's a point which I think is also part of the Data Governance Act. They say that intermediaries should provide, you know, standard consent form and things that individuals can use with third parties. But it's still being debated right now. It's not an actual legislation, it's a proposal. So, but this is promising, I think, especially in Latin America. There's so many questions that I'm losing a little bit track here. Is there?
Joao and I are having a side conversation about whether it matters the size of the company that he provides services for. And my hypothesis was that his services would be taken up mostly in larger companies. And he actually said it's the reverse, that the bigger the company, the harder it is to create a system that captures all the data and delivers it to consumers. In smaller companies, it's much easier. And I find that absolutely fascinating, because it means that it would be possible to offer these services to small and medium enterprises, pymes, and make it part of a developmental process for a national economy. So I think that's really interesting.
Kathrine, actually, and our platform is actually very cheap if you compare it to other solutions, very, very cheap. And smaller companies can just put our platform in their websites and have a manual dashboard where they can answer manually the DSR requests, but they have it centralized. So it doesn't become a mess, you know, and they still comply with the LGPD.
Well, so then that makes a really interesting link with Rodrigo's work in trying to create data markets.
Yes. Rodrigo, do you want to jump in there also to comment on my previous suggestions or reflections on the need for data governance here in Latin America, something like the Data Governance Act?
Yes, sorry, I'm here. Yes, something that I believe that we discussed before with you a couple of times is especially, and I like to compare about data with any type of company in LatAm, because something that happens in LatAm, I believe that doesn't happen in other parts of the world, or maybe yes, but not as happened here. For example, if a new company wants to come to LatAm, what they think is, okay, I will go to Brazil first, and then I will expand to another companies. But Brazil is like the entry for LatAm. It's like, okay, I will enter to Brazil, and I will go after to other places. So saying that in the case of data, what I believe is that or the companies need to align to Brazil, or if not, what will happen is that companies will not like care about each type of policy, but they will say, okay, I will take into account what Brazil is saying, and then maybe I will try to change and adapt to different countries, but they will say, okay, Brazil is the one that is correct, or just say is the role model. I believe that that's the difference maybe between LatAm and Europe, that is much more aligned. Also another thing is that maybe the difference between also LatAm and Europe is that our governments cannot agree in anything. I don't think that that data will be an exception on this.
Yes.
So from a company perspective, I believe that I really believe that Brazil will be the one that will lead and will be the role model for LatAm.
I just want to, if I can, very short, just to say that I think Mexico has the same effect on Central America. So it's the 220 million people country and the 120 million people country are probably the anchors there. On the other side of South America, though, I mean, Brazil is important, but I think that Argentina, Chile are also references. So all this to say that you're right, that the behavior of global corporations usually come from one of the two biggest countries, and then they go ahead. I think that just very short on what Jan said, I think we need to create incentives both on citizens and on companies to actually look for these kind of opportunities or these markets, because otherwise, and they have to be, you know, they have to fall within the existing regulation, right? I don't even know I think it was, he left, Peru.
Yes, he had to leave.
Anyway, so to his point, I don't know if the current legal framework in Peru would allow the emergence of data operators that can work as effectively as Rodrigo and Joao's. You know what I mean? Like, and in countries where there's no legal framework for data protection, the business case for companies and citizens to go through a data operator it's a little less clear. In terms of business opportunity and entrepreneur. It's not by chance that Brazil and Argentina are the ones that are seeing these probably in Uruguay, there's someone also doing these kind of things, because the legal framework actually requires a player that does this function of intermediaries and sort of safeguarding citizens' data. So I don't know, maybe the question,
maybe
at least from our side,
can respond, because Kathrine was involved in that project.
I'm a little unclear actually on what Arturo is saying, but Peru has a personal data protection law that predates GDPR. But you're
yeah,
actually,
but if I need to do the request by sending my personal information, and there's no market for someone that can aggregate that, or there are no incentives for someone that can aggregate that, and it's coming from civil society and from projects like yours, then
because Peru does not incentivize business. They just do not. It's not in their DNA of their political economy. And so there you see, it's really, it would be exactly difficult, as Rodrigo says, to have a standard for the region. Yeah.
But you would be surprised to see how creative lawyers can be in finding solutions to justify.
More complicated.
Yeah,
I'll shut up after this, but to also Jan's point, I think that we need to de-lawyerize data protection. I mean, if I need a lawyer to understand what I need to do or what my rights are, then we're lost. So I'm sorry, if there are any lawyers here, but we need to really start depending less, at least from the citizen side, to understand what's happening. And whenever I see a 4 pages long terms and conditions, there was a lawyer there, and and I probably need to cut it short and make it easier to digest. I'm sorry, Jan has been trying to say something for a while.
Oh, it's okay. This is my flag when there's time. If you're done, then I'll present. And I don't know if Nicolo, you're not a lawyer, are you?
I am. I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh, what are we gonna do?
But he's on rehab.
Yeah,
they're more relaxed than real. I think the golden grail and the big opportunity is the data sharing aspect. I mean, businesses might be thinking, how do I protect myself? Thinking of GDPR is a lot about protection, data privacy by design, and thinking of the citizen. But the Data Governance Act is moving it towards, okay, let's try to make it into a business. And there was a presentation in the morning, I think it was somebody presented about Gardner. They have done a research which companies that adopt a more individual focused and data sharing will be more successful in about 3 or 5 years. And if you start thinking in that mode. So I think it's a big opportunity as well. It's not only about privacy, it's about how do you share that data. And that's the fourth maybe point, is how do you explore that? I mean, you're gonna set up the MyData in the different countries, Mexico and Brazil, is to explore that. How do you bring it as an opportunity? It's not only a stress, but and how do you make it in such a way you don't need as much the legal groups managing, okay, how do I share data? It needs to be automated. There might need to be standardized the form the data is being exchanged or used for data users. So anyway, these are some of my reflections, but I think it would be great.
Those are perfect reflection for this conclusory part. So the part that I'm interested in also of what you said is that it points to the potential of infomediaries or data operators to be active at all levels, not just in the data request side or in the data response side or in the data deletion side, but actually you can then create the infrastructure that enables the data sharing. And that's right. Something that, I think here in the MyData community, we are all looking forward to. Now we are seeing this gradually becoming a reality, thanks to, also people at the European Commission who have been thinking about this future. But first we need to lay out the foundations, and they are not the same in all areas of the world. I mean, I think that we can agree that here in the Latin American, we are a little bit behind, and we need to perhaps use the community to catch up and not wait for the government to step in, and because they are even not ready for the data protection part. Imagine for the data utilization part. I mean, so that's what this session was trying to stimulate, this discussion. And in the future, I hope we can continue a discussion maybe on Slack, which is the main channel of MyData discussions. and set out some principles, do other events. Here at the MyData Hub, Brazil Hub, we are very happy to host other discussion like this, and we'll have also the regional conference in July 2021, where I hope everyone can participate. Also, I want to mention, in case you are a lawyer or interested in analyzing and monitoring legislation in your country regarding data protection and data use, please get in touch so you help us filling out this survey of legislation on data governance in different countries in the region, and we can present it in a very nice visual format at the conference in July. So with that, I see that we are already 1 minute out of time. I want to thank everyone for the great discussion, and again, stay in touch. It's just the beginning.